She planned her own fake death to discover who truly loved her. But when she showed up at her burial, what she discovered shocked her, and she couldn't believe the person she saw in the casket. Her name was Ngozi, 34 years old, living in Onitsha with her husband Emeka and their 2 children, a boy named Tobenna who was 7 and still crawled into her bed when the night scared him, a girl named Adeze who was 4 and who called specifically for Ngozi and nobody else when something hot. The family was poor in the specific grinding way that has no single dramatic cause, no catastrophe. No one terrible moment you can point to and say that is where it started. Just the slow accumulation of too little money against too many needs. Month after month after month, Emeka's electronics business had been failing for 2 years. The rent was behind. The school fees were behind. The food woman at the corner was running out of patience. Emeka's mother had lent them money twice and was now making the lending felt in every look and every visit and every conversation that started warmly and ended with a specific reminder of what she was owed. Ngozi held everything together. Not dramatically, not in any way anyone praised or even noticed. She held things together quietly the way the ground holds up everything built on it. Nobody thinks about the ground, they think about the building. She cooked when there was barely food. She smiled at the school gate when she had been awake since 3 in the morning. She greeted neighbors warmly, knowing they discussed her family's situation the moment she turned her back. She performed strength so consistently and for so long that she had forgotten what it felt like to be seen without performing. And one evening, standing at the kitchen sink washing dishes with water heated on a kerosene stove because the gas had been empty for 3 days, she thought something that surprised her. Do people actually love me? Not the version of me that holds everything together. The real version underneath all of it. If I disappeared tomorrow, what would people actually feel? She held that question for 3 days. Then she called her sister. Ada was 28 and worked as a nurse at the private clinic in Awka. She was the person Ngozi called when things were genuinely bad. The person who sent money without being asked and never mentioned it afterward. The person who had been watching Ngozi disappear into exhaustion for 2 years and had not known how to stop it. They met at Ada's flat on a Saturday. Ngozi laid out the plan. Ada would announce that Ngozi had died suddenly at home. She would handle the paperwork through a contact at the clinic. She would manage the family notifications. She would arrange everything. Ngozi would stay hidden at Ada's flat for 2 weeks. On the burial day, she would disguise herself and come to her own funeral as a distant relative. She would watch everything. She would see how Emeka behaved, whether he grieved, who he was when he thought she was gone. Then after the burial, they would announce it was a mistake, wrong identification. Ngozi was alive. She would come home and she would know the truth. Ada was quiet for a long time after Ngozi finished. Then she said it was the most extreme thing she had ever heard. Then she said she understood why. Then she said she would help. Because Ada had her own question about Ngozi's life. A question about Emeka that she had never been able to ask directly. A feeling she had carried for years without being able to prove it. They sat at Ada's kitchen table and planned everything carefully. They planned how Emeka would discover the body. He needed to find Ngozi at home. They discussed the position. They discussed the scene. They discussed what day he would come home to find her. They planned it like a script. 2 sisters sitting at a kitchen table choreographing a death scene with the specific focused energy of people who have decided on something and are seeing it through. They did not know that while they were planning on how Emeka would find the body was already there. They did not know that Ngozi had gone back to the house that night before. They did not know what she had found. They did not know what had happened after she found it. They were sitting at a table planning a scene that had already happened, and neither of them knew. Ngozi had gone back to the house the previous night, not to die, to collect things. Her children's photographs, some money she kept hidden under the floorboard, a few items of clothing, things she would need for 2 weeks at Ada's flat. She was going to be quick, in and out before anyone noticed. She let herself in quietly. She went to the wardrobe first, took what she needed, folded everything neatly into her bag, the way she folded everything, neatly, efficiently, without wasting movements. She went to the floorboard and retrieved the money. She straightened up and looked around the bedroom one last time. The papers on Emeka's table caught her eye. She almost did not look. She had learnt over years of marriage not to look too closely at things on that table. There was an unspoken agreement in their home about certain surfaces and certain silence, and Ngozi had honored that agreement for years without examining why she honored it. But this paper were not tucked away. They were sitting on top of the table in the arrangement of something recently examined and set down carelessly. Something seen so many times it no longer needed to be hidden. She picked up the top page, a photograph. Emeka, standing beside a woman Ngozi did not recognize. Both dressed formally, both smiling, the smile of a photograph taken on a significant occasion, both wearing wedding clothes. She put down the photograph. She picked up the document underneath, a marriage certificate, Emeka's name, a woman's name that was not Ngozi's name, a date 4 years after Ngozi and Emeka's own wedding. She read it once, she read it again, she read it a third time. Her heart, which had been under sustained pressure for 2 years of carrying everything alone or not enough of anything, simply stopped. Not with pain, not with drama, just stopped. The way an engine stops when it has been running too long on too little. She was on the floor before she understood she was falling. The photograph of her children were still in her bag. The money was still in her bag. The marriage certificate was still on the table above her, and the house was completely silent. The next morning, Ngozi was at Ada's flat. She came through the door while Ada was making tea in the kitchen. Ada heard the door and called out that the key was under the mats. "Come in, I am in the kitchen," without turning around. She heard Ngozi coming. She heard her set her bag down. She heard her sit at the kitchen table. She turned around with 2 cups of tea and smiled. Ngozi looked tired. Not the normal tired that Ada had been watching build in her sister for 2 years. Something deeper. Something that looked like a tiredness that went all the way down to a level Ada did not have a name for. She put the tea in front of Ngozi. Ngozi looked at it but did not pick it up. Ada sat across from her and said, "So it is done then? You got everything from the house?" Ngozi said yes. Ada said, "Are you all right?" Ngozi said, "I am fine." Ada looked at her for a moment. Something felt slightly off in that answer. Not the words, the quality of the words, the way they arrived, like they were coming from further away from the chair across the table. She reached across and put her hand on Ngozi's hand and put back slightly. Ngozi's hand was cold. Not cold the way hands got cold in Harmattan. Cold. The specific cold of something that has been outside in the night for too long. Ada said, "Your hands are freezing. Did you walk here?" Ngozi said, "I am fine, Ada." Ada looked at her sister's face. Ada almost said something. Then she told herself Ngozi was stressed. Of course she was stressed. She had just set the most extreme plan of her life in motion. She had gone back to the house and collected her things and come here, and now for 2 weeks she had to stay completely hidden. Stress did strange things to body temperature, Ada was a nurse, she knew this. She got up and got a wrapper from the bedroom and put it around Ngozi's shoulder. She sat back down and they began to go through the plan. The first sign happened that same evening. Ada made rice and stew. She served 2 plates. They sat at the table and Ada ate. She talked about the plan, about the notification she was going to send, about how to handle the clinic paperwork, about the timeline. She talked through the whole meal. When she looked up, Ngozi's plate was untouched. Ngozi said she was not hungry. Ada said, "You need to eat." Ngozi said she would eat later. Ada cleared the table. Later that night, when she went to the kitchen, she checked the plate she had covered and left out for Ngozi. It was exactly as she had left it, untouched. She told herself grief did this, stress did that. Even fake grief had a physical effect on the body. She washed the plate and went to bed. The second sign happened 2 days later. Ada was walking from the bathroom to the bedroom, and Ngozi stepped out of the spare room at the same moment, and they nearly walked into each other. Ada stepped back to let her pass. Ngozi walked past her and Ada felt it. A cold that had no source. A cold that followed the movement of Ngozi's body through the air, the way a breeze follows an open window. Here and then gone. Gone the moment Ngozi had passed. Ada stood in the corridor and looked at the spare room door. She told herself it was the fan in Ngozi's room. The flat had strange air circulation. She had noticed it before. She went to bed. The third sign happened at the end of the first week. Ada came home from the clinic and found Ngozi standing at the window looking at the street below. Standing completely still, not moving, not fidgeting, not doing anything with her hands the way people do when they are standing and thinking. Just completely still, looking at the streets. Ada called her name. Ngozi did not respond immediately. Ada called again. Ngozi turned, slowly, the way someone turns when they are returning from somewhere very far away. She said, "Sorry, I was thinking." Ada looked at her face. She almost asked the question that was forming in her. The question that the cold hands and the untouched food and the cold in the corridor and the way Ngozi's voice sometimes arrived like it was coming through water were all pointing towards. But she did not ask it, because she had no framework for the answer. She made tea instead. Ngozi held the cup. She did not drink from it. The tea was still full when Ada washed the cup that night. 9 days into the 2 weeks, Ada's phone rang. Emeka. Ada and Ngozi were sitting at the kitchen table going over the burial arrangements. They had been discussing what Ngozi would wear for her disguise, what time she would arrive, which entrance she would use to avoid people who knew her face well. Ada looked at the screen. She showed it to Ngozi. Ngozi's eyes changed slightly. Ada answered. Emeka's voice came through the phone, high and broken, in the specific way of a man who is not accustomed to losing control of himself and is losing control of himself. He said, "Ada." He said, "I came home." He said, "Ngozi is on the floor." He said, "She's not moving." He said, "There is something wrong." He said, "Please come." Ada looked at Ngozi across the table. Ngozi looked back at her. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then Ada understood. He found her. It was working. The plan was executing itself. Somehow, the timing had worked out. Emeka had come home and found the scene, and it had hit him exactly the way they had hoped it would hit him. Ada performed the shock grieving sister with everything she had. Her voice broke. She asked what he meant. She asked what had happened. She told him she was coming. She ended the call and sat with her hands flat on the table, breathing. Then she looked at Ngozi and almost smiled. She said, "It is working." Ngozi said nothing. Ada said, "He found you. Whatever you set up at the house before you came here, he found it." Ngozi looked at Ada's face. She said, "Yes." Her voice arrived the way it always arrived now, from somewhere slightly further than the chair she was sitting in. Ada did not notice. She was already reaching for her bag. Subscribe right now and turn on notification, because the next story is already waiting, and it is going to do exactly what this one is doing to you. Now stay with me, because it's about to get worse. Ada drove to the house the next morning, not to grieve, to manage, to make sure the scene looked right, to check that everything was in order before the official announcement went out. She parked outside. She sat in the car for a moment. She took a breath. She let herself in with the spare key. The house was quiet. She walked through the sitting room. Everything looked normal. She walked to the bedroom door and stopped. Ngozi was on the floor. Ada stood in the doorway and looked at her sister on the bedroom floor and felt something arrived in her chest that she immediately pushed down. She pushed it down because it was the wrong feeling. The feeling that was trying to arrive was the feeling of something being real. And this was not real. This was the plan. This was exactly what they arranged. She walked into the room. She looked at Ngozi more closely. The position was slightly different from what they had discussed at the kitchen table, but close enough. Stress this strange thing. Maybe Ngozi had positioned herself and then adjusted for a comfort. Ada looked around the room. She noticed the paper on the table, a photograph, a document. She picked them up. She read them. She stood at that table for a long time. Then she understood something about the past 9 days that she had not understood before. She understood the cold hands and the untouched food, and the voice that came from somewhere further than it should, and the stillness at the window. But she was not ready to understand it fully yet. Her mind offered her a different explanation, and she took it. She told herself Ngozi had seen this paper before she came to the flat. That was what had gone into her and made her look the way she had looked for 9 days. She had found this paper, and the shock of them had settled in her like something physical, and that was all. She put the paper in her bag. She looked at Ngozi one more time. She almost reached down to touch her. She stopped herself. She did not want to disturb the scene. Emeka had already called. The official discovery had already happened. She needed to leave things as they were. She walked out of the bedroom. She walked through the sitting room. She opened the front door. As she was pulling it shut behind her, she called Ngozi's phone to say well done, to say the papers were in her bag, to say it was all going to be all right. From inside the house, she heard the phone ring. She waited. It kept ringing. She thought Ngozi had forgotten her phone on purpose. Part of the staging. Smart. She pulled the door shut. She drove away. The phone rang inside the empty house for a long time, then it stopped. Ada managed everything from outside. The death announcements, the burial arrangements, the family notifications, the church, the compound booking, the burial date set for 5 days out. She came back to the flat each evening and briefed Ngozi on how things was going, what people were saying, how Emeka had responded, whether he was performing grief or genuine grief. She told Ngozi about Emeka's response. He had performed grief very well publicly. He had cried at the right moment. He had received condolence with the appropriate expression. He had handled the children's question with a care that surprised Ada. She had expected less from him. She did not tell Ngozi what she had found on the bedroom table. She was not ready to, not yet, not before the burial. She needed Ngozi to be focused for the burial day. They would tell her afterward, when it was done. Ngozi listened to everything Ada said each evening. She asked questions sometimes about the children, about how Tobina was handling it, about whether Adaeze was sleeping. She asked this question with a specific quality that Ada had given up trying to name. One evening, Ada reached out and touched Ngozi's face. Cold. She said, Ngozi, I need to ask you something. Ngozi looked at her. Ada said, are you actually all right? Not the plan, not the burial. You. Are you actually all right? Ngozi looked at her for a long moment. She said, I am here, Ada. Ada looked at her sister's face. She said, yes, I know you are here. She got up and made tea. She did not sleep well that night. She lay in her bed and listened to the flat, and once or twice she thought she heard something from the spare room. Not movement exactly. The absence of movement in the specific way that an absence can be loud when you are listening for it. She told herself she was tired. She closed her eyes. She did not let the thought in. The thought that was waiting at the edge of everything. The thought that had been waiting since the moment she stood in the bedroom door and looked at Ngozi on the floor and felt that wrong feeling in her chest that she had pushed down and refused to examine. She did not let it in. Not yet. Not until she had to. She came to the compound an hour into the ceremony. She had the headscarf, the dark glasses, a wrapper in a color she never wore. She had practiced in Ada's mirror. She looked like a distant relative, someone nobody would look at twice. She entered the compound. It was full. Not just family, neighbors, church members, the women from the markets, the school teachers, the food woman from the corner who was owed money and had still come. People from every part of her life had gathered in her compound in that afternoon heat. They came. All of these people came. She moved through the crowd, keeping her face angled away from people she recognized, looking for her children, looking for Emeka. She found her children with her mother near the side of the compound. Adaeze was asleep on her grandmother's lap with her thumb in her mouth. Tobenna was sitting completely still with an expression that did not belong on a 7-year-old face. The expression of someone trying to hold something that is too heavy for their size. She looked at her son. She wanted to go to him. She kept moving. She moved towards the front, and then she saw the front row. Emeka was sitting in the chief mourner's position. He was not alone. A woman sat beside him, not the way a sister sits beside a grieving man, the way a wife sits beside a husband, settled, present, belonging to the position the way someone belonged to a seat they have occupied many times before. She was perhaps 30 years old, carefully dressed. On her left hand, a thin gold wedding band caught the light. Ngozi looked at Emeka's mother. She was 3 seats away. She was not looking at the woman beside Emeka with any surprise. She was not shifting uncomfortably. She was not managing a difficult situation. She was just sitting, normally, at Ngozi's burial, with her son's secret wife in the front row. Ngozi looked at Emeka's brother. Same. Emeka's aunt. Same. Every person in that family was behaving the way you behave around something that has always been there. Something that needs no explanation because everyone already knows. Everyone except the woman whose burial they were attending. She felt something move through her that had no name. Something bigger than shock and more permanent than anger. She turned to move away from the front, and Chioma was coming directly towards her. 15 years. That was how long Ngozi and Chioma had been friends. They had met in secondary school. They had been at each other's wedding. They called each other every Sunday without fail. There was not a version of Ngozi's adult life that did not have Chioma somewhere in it. Chioma was walking towards her through the crowd with a face full of grief. The specific raw grief of someone who had just lost a person they genuinely loved. Making her way from the back of the compound towards the front with her eyes red and her wrapper slightly crooked, and her whole body carrying the weight of something she had not been prepared for. They were going to pass each other directly. Ngozi turned her face away, pulled the headscarf lower, angled her body slightly sideways to create space for Chioma to pass on the other side. Chioma did not adjust. Ngozi moved further to the side. Chioma kept coming directly towards her. Ngozi braced herself. 1 step, 2 step. She turned her face fully away and held her breath and waited for the moment Chioma's hand would land on her arm and her name would come out of Chioma's mouth in the specific way Chioma said her name, and everything would be exposed. Chioma walked directly through her. Not past her, through her. The way air moves through air. The way nothing moves through nothing. Without contact, without resistance, without the faintest awareness that anything had been there to walk through. Ngozi spun around. Chioma was already 3 steps past her, still walking, still moving toward the front. Her wrapper still slightly crooked, her eyes still red, completely unaware. Ngozi looked at her own hands. She could see them. She looked like her hands. She was there. She put her hands on the arm of the man standing beside her. Her hands went through his arms. He felt nothing. She grabbed his arms with both hands. Nothing. She looked around the compound, at all these people, at Chioma now at the front, at Tobenna sitting with his impossible expression, at the woman in the front row with the gold ring, at the family that all knew. She was seeing all of it. None of it was seeing her. She walked to the casket. She already knew. Some part of her had already known since the moment Chioma walked through her. The part that processes things before the mind is ready to receive them. She already knew what she was going to see. She walked towards it anyway, because you have to see. Even when you already know, you have to see. The casket was open. She looked in and saw herself, her own face, her own hands folded on her chest, her church wrapper, the one she had laid out on her dad's bed, thinking she would put it back on after the burial was over. The specific way her face looked in stillness, the particular set of her features that were only hers. She understood everything simultaneously. The night she went back to the house, the documents on the table, the falling. The next morning at Ada's flat, when Ada asked if she was all right, and she said, "I am fine," because she genuinely believed she was fine. The cold hands Ada kept noticing. The food she could not eat. The tea she could not drink. The cold that followed her through Ada's corridor. Ada going to the house and finding her and not understanding what she was looking at. Emeka's phone call that day had both misread as the plan working. 2 women sitting at a kitchen table planning a fake date while the real date had already happened. She had not faked anything. She had gone back to the house to collect some photographs of her children, and she had found the truth about her marriage, and her heart had stopped, and she had been dead since that night, and she had not known, and Ada had not known. And for 2 weeks, a dead woman and a living sister had sat at a kitchen table and planned a burial that was already real. She opened her mouth. The sound that came out had no language in it. Pure and total and enormous and completely without audience. Nobody in the compound heard it. Not one head turned. No one conversation paused. She was screaming at her own burial, and the compound full of people who had known her for 34 years could not hear a single sound she made. She screamed again. Silence. Do not move. Subscribe right now and turn on notification, because what happened next is the moment this entire story has been building towards. Stay. She tried everyone. She moved through the compound with the desperate energy of someone who refused to accept what cannot be changed. She put her hands on her face. She stood directly in front of people and called their names. She walked in front of her son and looked at his face and said his name over and over until she had no voice left to say it with. Nothing. No one flicker. No one moment of almost. Just the steady words continuing around her and through her, as though she was made of the same air as the afternoon itself. She was beginning to feel something that had no name in the language of the living. A pulling, a specific direction that had no address. Something gentle and patient and completely certain of itself, drawing her away from the compound and the casket and the secret wife in front row and all of it. She understood what it was. She did not have much time. She looked around the compound one last time and she saw Ada. Ada was standing at the back of the compound away from everyone. Her face was doing something that none of the other faces in the compound were doing. It was not performing grief. It was not managing a social situation. It was the face of someone who had just understood something unbearable and is standing very still because moving might make it more real. Ada was looking at the casket, and her face said that she finally knew. Whatever framework she had been using to explain away the cold hand and the untouched food and the voice from far away and everything else had just collapsed. The sight of Ngozi's face in that casket had collapsed it completely, and Ada was standing at the back of the compound, understanding for the first time that the person she had been talking to for 2 weeks, the person she had made tea for and covered with a wrapper and briefed every evening about the burial arrangements, was not the person she thought she had been talking to. Ngozi walked to her sister. She stood in front of her. She put both hands on Ngozi's face and pressed. Everything she had, the full force of everything she was, everything she needed to say, everything she had seen and understood and could not leave this place carrying alone. Ada went completely still. Her eyes changed. Not dramatically, a shift. The way eyes shift when something arrives in them from somewhere outside ordinary experience. Not a face she was seeing, a presence she was feeling. She whispered one word, Ngozi, so quietly that nobody around her heard it. Ngozi pressed harder. She gave Ada the front row. The woman, the gold ring, the mother-in-law who was not surprised, the whole family sitting normally because none of it was a surprise to any of them. The marriage certificate on the table that Ada had picked up and put in her bag. The specific knowledge that Ngozi had died holding that document, that the truth about her marriage had been the last thing she had touched in her life. She gave Ada the 2 weeks at the flat, the codes that Ada had explained away, the foods that Ada had covered and left out and washed away the next morning. Every sign Ada had seen and felt separately, so she never had to add them up. She gave her the phone ringing inside the house. She gave her the understanding of what that phone ringing inside the house had meant. Ada stood at the back of the burial compound and received all of it. Her hands came up and covered Ngozi's hands where they rested on her face. She could feel them. She was the only person in the compound who could feel them. Her whole body was shaking. She pressed her sister's hands against her own face and held them there. She said into the air in front of her, so quietly it was almost not sound at all. She said, Ngozi, I am so sorry. She said, I found the papers. She said, I have them. She said, I did not tell you because I did not want to hurt you before the burial, and I did not know I was talking to. She stopped. She breathed. She said, I did not know. I did not know. Ngozi pressed towards her, the only thing she needed her to know. Not fury about the front row. Not the specific devastation of the secret wife sitting in the chief mourner's position. Not the family that all knew. Not any of the things she had seen today that had confirmed every quiet fear of the past several years. Just this. I know you did not know, and I know you would have done anything to protect me if you had. And that is enough. That has always been enough. Ada stood with her dead sister's hand on her face and felt that message arrive in her, and she pressed her hands against her own chest, the way you press something in when it is threatening to come out. She said, I am going to make sure your children knows who their mother was. She said the real version, the one underneath all the holding together. The tired bravery version that nobody saw because you never stopped long enough to show it. She said Tobenna and Adaeze are going to know. She said, I promise you. Ngozi pressed one last thing towards her sister. Not information, not instruction. The feeling of Tobenna's weight in her arms, the night when he came to her because something scared him. The feeling of Adaeze's small voice saying, Mama, with the specific certainty of a child who has decided that one person is the safe person. She gave Ada both of those feelings. She said without words, they are going to need someone. Ada felt it arrive in her. She said, stay quiet, still into the air. I know. I am already theirs. I have always been theirs. She said, go. She pressed Ngozi's hand one more time against her face. She said, go. She said, I have it from here. Ngozi walked away from her own barrier, not towards the gates, in the direction the pulling had been pointing since she arrived in the compound. The direction with no address. The one that existed slightly to the side of every direction she had ever walked in her life. She passed the casket one more time. She looked at herself. The wrapper she had laid out on Ada's bed. The hand folded on her chest. The face that had smiled at school gates and greeted neighbors and held everything together for 34 years without ever asking whether the holding was sustainable or whether there was any version of the arrangement where someone held her back. She looked at herself for a long time. Then she looked at Tobenna. He was still sitting beside his grandmother, still wearing that expression that was too large for him. And then, in the exact moment she was looking at him, he looked up. Not at her, not towards her specifically, just up. The way children sometimes look up for no reason that adults can name. He looked up at the air above the compound and his expression changed. Just slightly, just enough. The specific softening of a child who has felt something without knowing what they are feeling. He looked back down. Ngozi turned. She walked through the compound gates. The sound of the burial fell away from her. The voices and the crying and the pastor's word and all of it becoming quieter and quieter. The way sound become quiet when you move far enough from their source. And then the streets became something else. Quieter than everywhere she had ever been. Lighter than anywhere she had ever been. The specific quality of somewhere that was not the world she had known for 34 years, but that was nothing either. Something new. Something without the specific weight of rent that was behind, and school fees that were behind, and a husband who had built a second life beside her, and a family who had all known. Without all of that weight, she was lighter than she had been in years. She had come to her own burial to find out whether people loved her. She had found out. Some of them had loved her the way the front row loved her, which was not love at all. But one person had loved her the way Ada loved her, which was complete, without performance, without condition, with the specific totality of someone who had chosen her, the real version, the tired, brave real version, long before she had known how to show it. One person. That was enough. That had always been enough. She had just needed to find out it existed. She kept walking into the quiet, into the light, into the specific piece of something that has been carrying a very heavy thing for a very long time, and has finally gently put it down. Behind her in the compound, Ada straightened her shoulders. She opened her bag. She looked at the marriage certificate one more time. She looked at the front row where Emeka sat with his other wife and his family, who had all known and had said nothing. She looked at Tobenna and Adaeze, who were not hers. She thought about what Ngozi had pressed towards her, everything she had seen, everything she had understood, everything she needed someone to carry forward. Ada was going to carry it, all of it. She walked towards the front row, quietly, without drama, with the specific certainty of someone who has made a decision and will not be turning back. Ngozi had come to her own burial to find out the truth about her life. She had found it, and she had left it in the only hands she had ever completely trusted. This has been Whispers of the Forbidden, where some stories were never meant to be told, but needed to be.